Thank you very much. It's good to see you all still here. It's been a long day, so we've decided to cut this session a little bit shorter in order to get you to your breakout sessions a bit quicker. So a slightly slimmed down panel, but we will still have the same quality of discussion, I hope. I'm sure we will. So if I could just invite up to the stage my colleagues Simon Calder, the Senior Travel Editor from The Independent, Dermot King from Bourne Leisure, who oversees Butlins, and Richard Lewis from Interchange and Consort Hotels, the parent company of Best Western. Those of you who don't know me, London & Partners, I think you would have heard my chairman, Kit Malthouse, speak this morning. We're a public-private partnership which promotes the city. We have quite a large media and PR team. Over the last year, we've been very proud to increase our coverage in the media by about 400%. We were responsible for generating more than 9,000 media pieces, broadcast pieces, journalism pieces, which told London's story brilliantly to audiences around the world, to visitors to London, to students to London, to investors in London. And so that's a key part of our work, but it's also, we heard a lot today about digital technologies, social media channels, and again, that's a very important part of our work. Some of the work we did in the China market last year reached more than 85 million social media users. So bypassing the tier one media, going straight through peer-to-peer social media is also a key part. And that's really what today's panel session, this last panel session, is about. So if I can perhaps start by asking Richard and Dermot, does the industry know collectively what it's trying to communicate, what its messages are, who it's trying to communicate to, and does it do that effectively? Richard.
I think that obviously we can talk through our own brands. I think that Best Western today is actually communicating very strongly. One of the key messages is the differentiation that we have within the brand. So somebody said earlier today, don't try and be what you're not. And I think sometimes the industry as a whole has looked at Best Western and thought perhaps we've been somewhat inconsistent in the delivery of our product and service. What we're without doubt is we're celebrating our differences right now. So everything is about storytelling, and we've had story catchers around in Great Britain for the last year, seasoned journalists capturing stories from our hotels, and our stories are unique. We have castles and mansions and contemporary hotels. We have the oldest hotel in Europe. So those are the messages we're getting out. And I think it's resonating not just with our guests, but also with the hotels that wish to join us. So this year alone, we've had a record number of hotels wishing to join in the first 3 months, which are 25 hotels. So we're definitely getting the message out there. How we're communicating, that's the key. And it isn't just through us friends in the media, and Simon is definitely one of our friends. It's actually by understanding who our influencers are. And those influencers can be anybody. So we have a large number of publics. One public, obviously, are our members of Best Western. It's a membership organisation. But clearly, there are a number of guests who stay with us, and they have a voice. And their voice is extremely loud, and it's getting louder. And whether we like TripAdvisor or not, I don't think it's of any relevance. I think the fact is that TripAdvisor is an incredibly valuable tool, and guests are choosing to use TripAdvisor to actually share their experiences. And that's what travelers are looking for, experiences at hotels and experiences when they travel. And we need to get all the influencers to actually support the brand. So that's what we're doing.
Dermot, you, at Bourne, at Butlins, you've done a huge amount with social media, a very successful strategy. Maybe 10, 20 years ago, people might have asked, is Butlins still a relevant brand for consumers in the UK?
Yeah,
Clearly, you've done a phenomenal job to make the case that it is. How have you done that?
Yeah, it is true to say that 10 years ago it wasn't difficult to get Butlins into the newspaper headline story, not always for the right reasons, and that was really because, going back to basics, we didn't really have a transcendent purpose as to what our business was trying to be, and therefore we didn't give it a proper, or it didn't have a proper direction. But more recently, we found that we've generated newspaper headlines usually when some government official or some head of some union or something is trying to make a policy speech and is using for a brand to hook it around. And Butlins, a bit like Marks and Spencer's, I suppose, or British Airways or John Lewis, because it's 80 years old, has a good attraction to the newspapers. And so when Chris Grayling, the employment minister 5 years ago, wanted to run a story about health and safety being used as a shield by businesses for poor practice, a Daily Telegraph reporter who did have a break at Butlins ran a story, and then the following day the Sun ran the headline, Barmy buses ban bumper cars from bumping at Butlins. And I was that Barmy bus, and it wasn't true, we didn't ban bumper cars from bumping. But more lately, to actually capture a newspaper's imagination, you have to really think about how newspapers operate these days. Because just like, I don't know, the high street record shop industry or the book industry or the travel agent industry, the internet has basically killed that bit of the high street, and it's also basically killed quite a lot of the print media, and it's a different form of media. To many newspapers, their online content is far more important than their print content. And so when you try and run a story, you have to think about how they're going to give that story, not just in the newspaper, but also enable them to have enough content so their readers can share it online.
So Simon, to that point, Barmy Boss bumper cars, banned bumper cars, at least he didn't have the word bonks in there, which is usually the Sun's headline. Why does the media have to be sensationalist? Why does the media have to pick up on the negative stories? Why couldn't it have been a headline about Butlins and apprenticeships?
It's a fantastic headline, and we can talk about how positive or negative ultimately it proves for Butlins, but to be in the same arena as British Airways, the BBC, John Lewis, Marks and Spencer's is surely a great place to be. And so I would defend the media by saying that a nation's media reflects its public. And so therefore the public love having their suspicions about health and safety being used as an excuse confirmed. And just because the story's not true and it happens to be in the Sun, well, that's something for the industry to respond against. And I must say that while individually, of course, people like London and Partners, people like Butlins, people like Best Western are getting specific messages across, as a whole, I am dismayed as a consumer of your excellent products, the best, most competitive accommodation hospitality sector in the world, that you don't get the praise that you deserve, and neither, when there are specific things that you need to be shouting about, there is not, unfortunately, apparently the will to get them across. So, a couple of examples, if I may. I'm straying slightly off the point here, but you can bring me back. Somerset, at the start of this year, basically sank, or at least that was what people were getting the impression. Okay, they were getting it from the pictures they were seeing on the news at 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever, and quite rightly there are fewer people watching. There's still millions of people thinking, well, I'm not going anywhere near southwest England, even though most of it was surprisingly not a subtropical swimming paradise. It was still thriving and open for business, and I'm not sure that message got across just as it in anybody old enough to remember the foot and mouth crisis. Of course, that was absolutely catastrophic for rural properties in particular. And tackling some of the threats which I know concern you, OTAs and the very difficult relationship that the hospitality industry has with those, Airbnb. I'm absolutely delighted as a consumer and as a journalist writing on pro-consumer issues that we have so much choice, and yet I haven't seen properly the argument advanced that, sure, yeah, we welcome all competition. We've been competing with each other like rats in a sack for years, but they have to be on a level playing field. They have to pay their taxes. They have to respect health and safety and so on. Sorry to bring it back to health and safety. I know that's particularly sensitive, Dermot. So the media is going to reflect the society. The media wants great stories to tell, whether they are about the oldest hotel in Europe, in Salisbury, I do understand, or whether they are about Barmy Butlins bosses. Sorry.
Richard, you would have had hotels in areas that everyone thought were underwater. How did you get the message out? It was business as usual. There were still opportunities. There were still things that could be done.
I think a lot of it was done on the local basis, but what we did do is try to support the hotels. So I personally sent messages out to all the owners of the hotels and the general managers to say, what could we do? I mean, in some cases, it was as simple as the lines had gone down. There were no reservations going into those hotels because there's no telephone lines. We actually then diverted all those lines to our call centre in York. So it was that sort of thing. I mean, basically the people at the hotels and in those areas which were affected actually did most of the work, but we were there to support whenever we could.
So
yeah, I'll give you another example, if I may, of reacting to. We always say it in Bourne, we're quite good in a crisis, but reacting to a crisis. Michael Gove, in his wisdom, removed the discretion from school teachers to allow children to take school holiday breaks during midweeks in midterm. That to us was a huge challenge. That's 20% of my business under threat. We had to react to that imaginatively. What we did was we invented the Just for Tots break. So that is, we changed, though the conditions of that break was that you must have somebody of 5 years of age coming on the party. And we built the break around preschool children with preschool activities, etc., etc., and all the entertainment finished at 8 o'clock in the evening, and etc., etc. I've got a stable of 81 characters. I can have character breakfasts in all of my restaurants all the time, and we can build a very, very rich experience. But that isn't really what made the thing and successful. And just like earlier, I wouldn't be telling you the story unless it was successful. We pushed it through the media, but it was a good story. But good stories in themselves are not strong enough for media representation. The good story has to be, number one, surprising, and secondly, have a hook. And the hook needs to be, can they present that story online? Now, what we did was we decided to employ a quality director who could not be no more than 5 years of age. So we employed what we called a high chairman. And we ran the story through the newspaper, and the newspaper printed the hook that Butlins was looking for a new chairman who had to be 5 years of age, and that was to manage the quality control of our Just for Tots breaks. But the hook was that we invited people to apply on behalf of their children for the role. And attached to, so the story was ran in the paper, and then online it was rerun with an application form. And the application form got shared. And that's what you need from a story that's going to resonate. You need something that's a good story, something that is shareable. And then the third thing I think you need is something that gives the brand the opportunity to have an emotional connection with the individual guest. And because it was an individual person applying on behalf of their son or daughter, it allowed us to speak to them individually. And 60% of the people who applied had never been on a Butlins holiday. And 71% of the people who actually came on the first 4 breaks that we've shown this year are new customers. And this is the killer point from the business entrepreneurs. If I can deliver a great experience to 71% of my new customers on those breaks who are 5 years of age and under, I have those customers forever.
Absolutely. No, it's a fantastic story. And Simon, my head of media, who used to be a senior editor at the BBC, always tells me to Dermot's point, it's not that the media is interested in just in negative stories, they're interested in interesting stories.
Oh, most certainly. And look, there's loads and loads around. For example, coincidence last year, Best Western knocked on my door and said, we've got charging points for electric cars in dozens of our hotels. We're rolling them out for the whole lot. And at the same time, I got something from the New Forest saying, we've got a fleet of electric cars to rent. So, absolutely magic. I go off and rent one, drive it around the New Forest, stay at the Best Western, all lovely, except when it says you can do 56 miles on a full charge, you can't. But the police were very understanding. yeah, there's great stories to be told. I mean, let me give you a chance here, because very often these opportunities are missed. Flybe, for instance, suddenly surprised the world by saying, we are going to be offering half a dozen destinations from London City. That means going to Newcastle, going to Inverness, going to Exeter. You have planes from the biggest, richest travel market in Europe. Yet I was not getting calls from people in each of those locations saying, guess what, we've got this fantastic deal for people coming from London to take advantage of that. And so there are opportunities all the time. Here's one. We're a liberal, tolerant newspaper, The Independent. We celebrate Europe, we celebrate diversity. So after the European elections, which were quite interesting politically, I thought, what are we going to do in the travel pages to celebrate the diversity of Britain and to point out that we are lucky enough to live in a very richly multicultural country? And so we will be doing the most exotic high street in Britain. And if you've got any ideas, you can tweet them very easily at Simon Calder. And exotic, just so you know, this is what the Oxford Dictionary says: originating in or characteristic of a distant foreign country. So that takes in places like Chinatown in Manchester or Newcastle. It takes in, of course, the very, very intensely Indian, Asian areas of Leicester, of Southall and so on. And there's even streets in London which are full of Swedish places. So if you've got any great ideas, send them in and shush. Not those places. Although you can find details on my Twitter feed.
Let me challenge one of the things that you said. When the new airline routes were opened up, you weren't inundated with calls.
No.
Is it because they don't need you? They can go direct to the customers now. Your form of media is your dinosaur.
Thank you very much. How kind, Gordon. I've always said how much I admire London and Partners. No, the media is whatever the consumer says the media is or are. And it's a really exciting time. If we'd gone back 20 years, my goodness me, you would be sending me faxes about these fantastic stories that you've got, or maybe phoning me up, and I would be writing the stories, and then all of you would obediently go out and spend 27 pence or whatever it was on The Independent. And thank you very much for doing that for so many years. Now, of course, it strikes some people as a bit quaint going to a shop and handing over £1.20 for a newspaper, but luckily plenty of people do it. However, of course, there are more people reading, for example, the Mail online than there are reading it in paper. There's a huge amount happening that nobody has any control over, because if on sun.co.uk, even though that's behind a paywall, were it not, then as soon as you've got balmy Butlins bosses, sorry it keeps coming back to you, that is shared by millions of people, and that's fantastic. And we, as the media, have to be platform agnostic. So yesterday, what was the big travel event yesterday? Terminal 2 at Heathrow. So there we were, the organisation I work for, you had London Live there. I was writing stories for the Independent, for the Standard, putting them online, because clearly this was happening at dawn yesterday, and by today it's just a little bit old. And then you do things like, I found Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia. He happened to be on the first flight, and he didn't know he was on the first flight. And the good thing is, about the 21st century, you whip out your iPhone and you can film a high-definition clip of Wikipedia man who should know everything that there is to know in the world, not knowing that he's on the first flight from a 2.5 billion terminal. So it's a fantastic, exciting time to be in the media. It's a bit scary, but the same thing goes for hospitality.
Let me bring it back. I'm getting from Ufi and her team, so let's wrap it up with one last question. Bringing it back to the industry as a whole. We've heard a lot about the economic contribution of the sector. We've heard a lot about what the sector is doing around apprenticeships and the fantastic work to bring NEETs into employment. How are you working together using the media, through the media, to get to the policymakers, to get to the influencers who can either really damage your industry or really support your industry, the politicians, and similar? Do you think you're doing that well?
I think the BHA is doing a fantastic job of that, and the people who are within the BHA are doing a fantastic job. And I think that that's how the industry has to work together. So this Tourism Council, I think, is a fantastic step forward. It is what we wanted. I think that there has been some noise in the coffee breaks about we'd like to see what the agenda is, to see how we're going to push it forward. But certainly it is absolutely the right step, and it's something that we've wanted for a long time. We can only influence as a group. And as an industry, we are quite fragmented, in fact, extremely fragmented. Why is it that the OTAs beat up on the hotel industry? Because the airline industry said, we're not going to pay you commission any longer. And therefore, they went for someone else, so they went for us. We're easy prey, and we don't get our act together. How did we allow them to come into our market space? So it's only through cohesive action that we can actually get our act together. Now, obviously, cohesive action has to be somewhat tempered because it's very close to being a cartel, and we obviously know that that's illegal. So we have to work together with government to understand how we can push the industry forward. It is, I've been in this industry 40 years. It is an incredibly dynamic, fun, vibrant, differentiated industry. And I think that young people today, and I've heard it sort of on and off all day, that we need to get across that something is changing about our industry. It is not a place to be if you can't get a job somewhere else. This is an industry where you should be proud of being part of it. And I think that a lot of people have said that they started out in the industry and sort of the first job in their career was actually as a dishwasher. The fact is that probably wasn't their first job in the career, but there are a lot of people in the room who went through training programs where you had to do that you actually learnt the industry bottom up and you started your first day in that job and then worked your way through. And it is just an amazing industry. And I would welcome the opportunity to work with anybody to get more young people into our industry. And that is a collective, what Patrick is doing on the big conversation is excellent, and we need to be part of that.
It's a great message. One last, maybe throw out a challenge, your last thoughts, Simon. What could the industry do more of, do better in this area?
This is really just picking up from Richard's comments about valuing the industry properly. And if you go back, as I sadly did, I know I should get out more, and go through all the party manifestos from the last election, tourism, hospitality gets hardly a mention, and the BHA is doing fantastic things. I wish the Tourism Council well, but I would be lobbying right now the three main political parties, and if you like, UKIP, and saying, what are you going to be saying that will strengthen this absolutely vital industry and give the British public, who have an uneasy relationship with the hospitality industry, we love it, we're great avid consumers of it, but we're not sure because it doesn't sort of quite make things if it is a proper industry. Of course it is. It's a fantastic industry, thanks to the great contribution you all make, and it's about time that the government gave it due recognition. For example, perhaps even by having a department which includes the word tourism. That would be exciting.
Great. That's, I think, probably a good place to end this session. Some very good comments around the importance of storytelling, a good story, an interesting story, a shareable story, using multiple platforms, not just Tier 1 media, but also all of the other social media platforms that are available. We could have talked about where the Tier 1 media gets a lot of its stories from, which is exactly from those social media, from Twitter, from elsewhere. And the need for cohesive action across the industry to demonstrate the value by working together that we contribute to the economy. So a good place to end. Please thank the panel members for their contribution, and thank you for listening.